The night sky over Baghdad erupted in a symphony of tracers and explosions. CNN cameras captured what looked like fireworks, but for the young Marine watching from his position in the Saudi desert, it was the beginning of something that would haunt him forever. "We thought it would be like Vietnam," he whispered to his buddy, gripping his rifle. "Long, bloody, endless." They had no idea they were about to witness the most technologically advanced military operation in human history. January 17th, 1991, 2:38 a.m. local time. The world held its breath as Operation Desert Storm began. For months, 500,000 coalition troops had waited in the scorching Arabian desert, preparing for what many predicted would be America's next Vietnam. The ghost of that jungle war hung heavy over every soldier's mind. Mothers back home clutched their rosaries. Fathers who had served in Southeast Asia stared at their television screens, remembering their own nights of terror. In the cockpit of an F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter, Major Greg Feast steadied his breathing. Below him, Baghdad slept unaware. His aircraft, invisible to radar, carried 2 laser-guided bombs destined for a telecommunications center. He was about to fire the first shots of a war that would redefine modern combat. The precision was surgical, the impact revolutionary. Back in Washington, President George H.W. Bush watched the live footage from the White House Situation Room. A World War II Navy pilot himself, he understood the weight of sending young Americans into harm's way. The diplomatic hourglass had run empty. Now came the storm. In the deserts of Saudi Arabia, 19-year-old Private First Class John Matthews from small-town Iowa checked his gas mask for the 100th time. Chemical weapons. The 2 words that terrified every soldier more than bullets or bombs. Saddam had used them before. Intelligence reports suggested he wouldn't hesitate to use them again. John's hands trembled as he thought of his high school sweetheart back home, the engagement ring he'd bought with his combat pay still hidden in his footlocker. The technology gap between the coalition forces and Iraq was like bringing a computer to a knife fight. While Iraqi forces dug trenches reminiscent of World War I, coalition forces deployed weapons that seemed pulled from science fiction. Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from ships in the Persian Gulf found their targets with pinpoint accuracy. Apache helicopters with night vision obliterated Iraqi radar sites. But behind every smart bomb was a human being. Behind every technological marvel was a young man or woman who had kissed their family goodbye not knowing if they'd return. The machines were precise, the emotions were raw. This was not a video game, despite what the sanitized footage on CNN might suggest. This was war, and war always demands a human price. The ghosts of Vietnam haunted every military briefing room. General Norman Schwarzkopf, a bear of a man who had served 2 tours in that jungle hell, was determined this would be different. "We're not going to fight this war with one hand tied behind our back," he growled to his staff. His father had fought in World War II. He himself had bled in Vietnam. Now commanding the largest American military operation since that conflict, he carried the weight of both histories on his massive shoulders. The numbers were staggering. 956,600 coalition troops from 39 countries, 2,000 aircraft, 100 warships. Against them stood the 4th largest army in the world, 650,000 Iraqi troops, 4,500 tanks, battle-hardened from 8 years of brutal war with Iran. On paper, it should have been a bloodbath. American military planners predicted 20,000 casualties in the first week alone. Captain Sarah Morrison, one of the few female pilots flying combat missions, prepared her A-10 Warthog for another sortie. The aircraft, ugly as sin but deadly as a cobra, was designed for one thing: destroying tanks. As she taxied down the runway, she thought about the letter from her daughter, tucked inside her flight suit. "Mommy, please come home safe." In the cockpit, gender didn't matter. Fear didn't discriminate. The air war was a massacre in slow motion. For 38 days and nights, coalition aircraft pounded Iraqi positions with ruthless efficiency. They called it tank plinking, using million-dollar aircraft to destroy Soviet-made tanks one by one. Each flash on the infrared footage was someone's son, someone's father. The technology was clean, the death was not. Meanwhile, Saddam Hussein played his own game. Scud missiles, inaccurate but terrifying, rained down on Israel and Saudi Arabia. The world held its breath. Would Israel retaliate and shatter the coalition? In Tel Aviv, Families huddled in sealed rooms with gas masks, remembering the Holocaust, fearing chemical death from the sky. The waiting was killing the ground forces. Day after day, they trained in the desert, practiced chemical warfare drills, wrote letters home, and wondered when their turn would come. Marine Lance Corporal Miguel Rodriguez from East LA had joined up to pay for college. Now he found himself in a place that looked like Mars, waiting to charge into what everyone said would be a meat grinder. The media called it the Nintendo War because of the video game-like footage of smart bombs destroying targets, but for those on the ground, nothing felt like a game. The desert was a cruel mistress, scorching by day, freezing by night. Sand got into everything, and always, the waiting for the order that would send them north into Kuwait, into the teeth of an army that had already proven it would use any weapon, commit any atrocity to survive. February 24, 1991, 4:00 a.m. The ground war began not with a frontal assault, but with the largest deception operation since D-Day. While CNN reported massive Marine movements along the Kuwaiti border, the real knockout punch was swinging far to the west, through the Iraqi desert where no army was supposed to go. They called it the Hail Mary, Schwarzkopf's masterstroke. The Iraqis had spent months preparing for a head-on collision. They dug trenches, laid minefields, filled ditches with oil to set ablaze. Their defensive lines looked like the Western Front of World War I. They were about to face tomorrow's war. Marine combat engineers crawled forward in the pre-dawn darkness, probing for mines, marking lanes through the killing fields. Behind them, thousands of Marines waited in their armored vehicles, engines running, hearts pounding. Staff Sergeant Marcus Washington, a veteran of Beirut, whispered a prayer his grandmother had taught him. The artillery barrage that preceded the assault was biblical. When the barrage lifted and the Marines charged forward, they found not the elite Republican Guard, but terrified conscripts, many trying to surrender to anyone, anything, including one confused CNN camera crew. What followed was less a battle than a rout. Iraqi soldiers, demoralized by weeks of bombing, abandoned their positions in droves. Tank battles that were supposed to last hours ended in minutes. The M1 Abrams tanks, making their combat debut, could kill Iraqi T-72s from distances the enemy couldn't even see them. It wasn't fair. It wasn't even close. But amid the triumph came moments of pure horror. On the highway of death, the road from Kuwait City to Basra, coalition aircraft caught retreating Iraqi forces in the open. For hours, they pounded the convoy, turning the highway into an apocalyptic scene of burned-out vehicles and charred bodies. The images, when they reached the media, would help hasten the war's end. Private First Class Jessica Martinez, a combat medic, found herself treating more Iraqi wounded than American. The prisoners came in waves, hungry, thirsty, many suffering from dysentery and despair. Some were boys, barely teenagers, pressed into service by a regime that saw them as expendable. She held the hand of one young Iraqi soldier as he died, showing him a photo of his family he carried. This was victory, but it tasted like ash. By the second day, coalition forces were advancing so fast they were outrunning their supply lines. The Iraqi army, once the fourth largest in the world, was disintegrating like tissue paper in rain. A war everyone expected to last months was being measured in hours. Captain Mike "Hammer" Harrison pushed his F-16 into a steep dive. Below, an Iraqi armored column tried desperately to escape north. His wingman's voice crackled through the radio. "Hammer, this is starting to feel like murder." Mike knew what he meant. After weeks of air supremacy, attacking Iraqi forces felt less like combat and more like an execution. The ground war revealed the true horror of Saddam's occupation of Kuwait. As coalition forces liberated Kuwait City, they discovered a nation brutalized beyond imagination. Torture chambers and police stations. Hospitals looted of everything, including premature baby incubators. Lieutenant David Kim, leading a reconnaissance platoon into the city, found a warehouse full of stolen cars, all with bloodstains in the back seats. "This wasn't war," he reported. "This was organized crime on a national scale." The environmental terrorism was even worse. Saddam's forces had set Kuwait's oil wells ablaze, over 600 fires that turned day into night and rained black soot from apocalyptic skies. The images shocked the world, flames shooting hundreds of feet into the air, creating a hell on Earth that could be seen from space. Back in America, the country watched in real time as their military delivered a performance that seemed to erase the ghosts of Vietnam. Yellow ribbons appeared on every tree. But for many veterans of that earlier conflict, the contrast was bittersweet. "I'm happy for these kids," said Tom Bradley, a Vietnam veteran watching the parades on TV. "But I can't help wondering, where were our parades?" As the 100-hour ground war entered its final day, coalition forces had achieved every objective. Kuwait was liberated. The Iraqi army was shattered. The road to Baghdad lay open, but in Washington, President Bush faced the hardest decision of the war: when to stop. The coalition was built to liberate Kuwait, not conquer Iraq. Going further risked turning triumph into quagmire, liberators into occupiers. February 28, 1991, 8 a.m. local time. After exactly 100 hours of ground combat, President Bush ordered a ceasefire. "Ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire," echoed across the radio networks. Private Danny Thompson from Detroit lowered his rifle and lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "That's it?" he asked his sergeant. "We won." The numbers were staggering in their lopsidedness. Coalition casualties: 292 killed, 467 wounded. Iraqi casualties, estimated between 25,000 and 50,000 dead, 75,000 captured. More American soldiers had died in accidents during deployment than in combat. Military academies would study this campaign for generations, but for the young men and women in the desert, only one statistic mattered: they were going home. But victory brought uncomfortable questions. In the Shiite south and Kurdish north of Iraq, populations rose up against Saddam, believing American forces would support them. They were wrong. As coalition forces withdrew, Saddam's remaining military turned on the rebels with genocidal fury. Captain Rachel Green watched helplessly from her observation post as Iraqi helicopters strafed fleeing Kurdish refugees. The homecoming was everything Vietnam veterans never had: ticker tape parades in New York, standing ovations at baseball games. Staff Sergeant Jerome Williams, marching down Broadway as confetti fell like snow, thought of his uncle who'd come home from Vietnam to protests and spit. "This is for you too, Uncle Ray," he whispered, yet some wounds cut deep. Gulf War Syndrome. Mysterious illnesses affecting thousands of veterans began appearing within months. Was it the smoke from burning oil wells? Experimental vaccines? Chemical weapons that were never reported? Veterans who'd survived combat without a scratch found themselves battling fatigue, pain, and a medical system that didn't know how to help them. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein clung to power, spinning defeat into victory for domestic consumption. The sanctions that followed would devastate Iraqi society, killing more civilians than the war itself. The unfinished business of Desert Storm would fester for 12 years, until another President Bush would send another generation of Americans into the desert. Master Sergeant Carlos Mendoza stood before the memorial wall at Fort Hood, running his fingers across the etched names of the 292 Americans who didn't come home from Desert Storm. Each name represented a story cut short, a family forever changed. He paused at one name: Specialist Anthony Riggs, 19, from Birmingham. Mendoza had held him as he died from a vehicle accident during the chaotic advance. The speed of victory had created its own casualties. Friendly fire claimed 35 American lives. In the confusion of sandstorms and night combat, Americans sometimes shot at Americans. The technology that made victory possible also made mistakes catastrophic. Each incident a tragedy that technology was supposed to prevent. Red Adair and his team of firefighters became unlikely heroes of the post-war period. These tough men attacked the burning wells with a combination of high explosives, massive water pumps, and sheer courage. Each well was a puzzle, each fire a monster that fought back. Watching them work, soldiers who had faced Iraqi tanks admitted these civilians faced a more terrifying enemy. Back home, the victory parades couldn't mask growing unease about what had been left undone. Saddam remained in power, using chemical weapons against his own people while the world watched. Victory, it seemed, had boundaries. Liberation had limits. The technological revolution displayed in Desert Storm changed warfare forever. Nations around the world studied the conflict, learning different lessons. China accelerated its military modernization. Russia reconsidered its entire doctrine. Smaller nations realized that fighting America conventionally was suicide. Better to develop asymmetric capabilities. irregular warfare, terrorism. For the Kuwaitis, liberation brought joy tinged with trauma. Hamza al-Rashid returned to find his home looted, his business destroyed, his brother executed for refusing to collaborate. "We are free," he said, standing in the ruins of his life. But freedom and healing are not the same thing. 5 years after the ceasefire, Dr. Michael Roberts sat in a VA hospital in Houston, surrounded by Gulf War veterans suffering from unexplained illnesses. The symptoms were real, the suffering undeniable, but the cause remained a mystery. "We trained for bullets and bombs," said former Sergeant Rita Johnson, struggling to breathe. "Nobody told us the air itself might be our enemy." The mystery of Gulf War syndrome exposed the hidden costs of modern warfare. Was it the experimental anthrax vaccines? The pyridostigmine bromide pills? Exposure to depleted uranium? The toxic smoke from burning oil wells? Each theory had advocates, but proof remained elusive. Meanwhile, veterans suffered while bureaucrats argued about causation and compensation. In Iraq, the sanctions regime imposed after the war created a humanitarian catastrophe. UN officials estimated that 500,000 Iraqi children died from malnutrition and preventable diseases in the decade following Desert Storm. While Saddam built palaces, his people starved. Captain Angela Davies, who had helped liberate Kuwait, now worked for a humanitarian organization documenting the crisis. "We won the war and lost the peace," she said. For the Kurds of northern Iraq, the aftermath was particularly bitter. Encouraged to rise up, then abandoned when realpolitik intervened, they faced Saddam's vengeance alone. Until belatedly, Operation Provide Comfort established a no-fly zone to protect them. The moral complexities of limited war had replaced the clarity of total victory. Veterans of the Lightning War found themselves becoming accidental historians. With the war so short and decisive, every moment seemed worth preserving. Staff Sergeant Marcus Washington created a website where veterans could share stories and reconnect. "It went by so fast," he explained. "If we don't remember it, who will?" On a cold December morning in 2003, Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez stood in the same patch of Iraqi desert where she'd fought in Desert Storm. Now, 12 years later, she was back. This time for Operation Iraqi Freedom. No clear front lines, no surrendering armies, no quick victory. "Last time we were liberators," she told her squad. "This time, I don't know what we are." The contrast was stark and painful. Where Desert Storm had united the world, Iraqi freedom divided it. Veterans of both conflicts felt the difference in their bones. Master Sergeant Williams, who had charged through Iraqi lines in 1991, now found himself dodging IEDs on routine patrols. "We've gone from blitzkrieg to bleeding," he wrote home. The children of Desert Storm veterans now served in Iraq, creating a strange generational echo. Private First Class Jennifer Thompson patrolled Fallujah streets while her father, who'd fought in the Lightning War, watched news coverage from Fort Campbell. "Dad, how did you know when you won?" she asked. He had no answer that would help her. Back home, the yellow ribbons still flew, but the national unity of 1991 had fractured. Veterans of the Lightning War watched their legacy being overwritten by a longer, bloodier conflict. At VFW posts, Desert Storm vets bought drinks for Iraqi freedom veterans, recognizing the heavier burden they carried. "We got the good war," admitted Sergeant Major Collins. "Clean, quick, victorious. These kids got the real war." General Schwarzkopf, retired but still revered, criticized the new war's planning. "We had a clear entrance and exit strategy," he told reporters. They seemed to have neither. The Iraqis had learned from their crushing defeat, fighting asymmetrically instead of conventionally. Every lesson of Desert Storm had been studied by both sides, but the Iraqis had learned better. 25 years after the ceasefire, the children who had waved American flags during Desert Storm victory parades were now veterans themselves, many bearing scars from Iraq and Afghanistan. At Arlington National Cemetery, retired Command Sergeant Major Angela Chen placed flowers on graves spanning 3 wars. "Same sand, different wars, more graves," she whispered. The quick victory of Desert Storm had created dangerous myths about American military power. Politicians spoke of surgical strikes and limited interventions, as if war could be conducted like a medical procedure. But every veteran knew the truth. Even the cleanest war leaves dirty wounds. In the veterans' hospitals, Desert Storm veterans faced a cruel irony. Their war had been so quick, so successful, that many struggled to have their service-connected injuries recognized. How could 43 days of combat cause lifelong disability? Mary Rodriguez fought for 10 years to get her respiratory problems acknowledged. "They act like because we won fast we can't be hurt bad," she said between labored breaths. For the Iraqis, the quarter-century since Desert Storm had been an unending nightmare. War, sanctions, war again, occupation, civil war, ISIS. A generation had grown up knowing nothing but conflict. Ahmed Hassan, who had been a child in Baghdad during the 1991 bombing, was now a doctor treating casualties from the latest fighting. "Your smart bombs of 1991 killed my uncle cleanly," he told an American colleague. "Your democracy of 2003 killed my brother slowly." As the years passed, Desert Storm veterans found themselves becoming the keepers of memory for a war America seemed eager to forget. It had been overshadowed by its longer, messier sequel. But they remembered when America could project power without apology, achieve objectives without occupation, win without losing itself in the process. Today, in a small town in Nebraska, Sarah Mitchell, daughter of a Desert Storm veteran who never made it home, teaches high school history. When she reaches the Gulf War in her curriculum, she shows her students 2 photographs. The first, celebrating Kuwaitis kissing American soldiers in 1991. The second, an American patrol in Baghdad, 2006, scanning rooftops for snipers. Same military, same region, different worlds, she tells them. Her father, Sergeant First Class Robert Mitchell, died not in combat but in a vehicle accident during the ceasefire. She keeps his photograph on her desk, next to pictures from her wedding he never attended, grandchildren he never met. "Every war is forever for someone," she answers. "Victory doesn't resurrect the dead." In Washington, the Gulf War Memorial stands as a testament to the last clear victory. Veterans visit, running fingers over names of friends, remembering when war had boundaries and endings. But many avoid the place. "It feels like visiting a museum of what we used to be," explains former Captain David Lee. For those who were there, time has transformed memory into meditation. They speak of fear conquered, of missions accomplished, of coming home to a grateful nation. They were the last American generation to win a war completely, quickly, cleanly. They were lightning warriors, and their kind will not come again. The lessons echo through time like thunder after lightning. Technology cannot substitute for strategy. Victory without vision leads to vengeance. Liberation without understanding becomes occupation. Desert Storm taught America how to win battles. Its aftermath taught why winning battles isn't enough. In the end, every war is a human story. Behind the smart bombs were smart young Americans who did their duty. Behind the precision strikes were imprecise emotions. Behind the victory parades were veterans struggling with invisible wounds. Behind the yellow ribbons were families forever changed. It was 292 Americans who went into the desert and never came out at all. The storm has passed. The desert remembers, the veterans age, the lessons fade. But for one brief moment in 1991, America knew exactly why it fought, how to fight, and when to stop fighting. It was the last simple war in a world that would never be simple again. We honor them now, the Desert Storm veterans, not just for what they accomplished, but for what they represent. The last time America's reach matched its grasp, the last time our power served a purpose everyone understood, the last time we won a war and knew it. They were magnificent in their moment. That their moment couldn't last is not their fault, but our tragedy. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Share your stories in the comments below. Whether you served, whether your family served, whether you remember watching those precision strikes on CNN. This history lives not in textbooks but in memory, not in monuments but in the men and women who were there when the storm broke over the desert and American lightning struck with terrible clarity. They were the storm. They were the lightning. They were the last of their kind, and we shall not see their like again.